Hello, everybody. How you doing tonight? Welcome to the School of Earth and Space Exploration, ASU's Virtual Night Sky program. My name's Rick Alling, and I'm the director of the Marston Exploration Theater. And with my colleague, Meg Hufford, she's helping put this program together tonight with us. We run the outreach programs to have visitors come to ASU, come to our building, visit our beautiful theater. You see that in the background, and galleries. And we have programming all year long. We have between 25 and 30,000 visitors usually. But with the pandemic, we have self-selected to kind of put together programs that we can bring into your living room. And what you're visiting us is on a regular, every other Wednesday night program we call Virtual Night Sky. And what we do in this program is we're all sort of like doing this together. We're learning a little bit about some constellations and some things going on and how the sky works and how the phenomenon works, some things that you can go look for. So in every program, we leave you with some instructions, with some homework, if you were. And so tonight is no different. We're doing this program from 7 to 8, and at 8 o'clock, put your coat on. I'm going to send you outside, and it gives you some things to look back and look at. And I'm going to give you some assignments and things to kind of like challenge you a little bit to find some very obscure, very dim little asterisms and star formations over the next couple of weeks, if we can do it. And so that's part of how we do this. We have 3 students that work with us on this particular program all the time. They are part of our program. They work in the theater, they work in the galleries, and they do that. One of them is Spurti Kachari is with us tonight. Alex Blanche is here tonight, and Alicia Hyatt. Alicia has done a lot of the programming in the theater with me, and you're going to meet her a little bit more directly tonight because she's going to take part of the program. She's going to talk to us towards the end about a blue moon and what that means. I'm going to lead you through the first parts of the program, and this is really into the stars and looking at the stars in a very, very unique way. We're going to use some technology from the SkyScan system. That's the one we have in the theater in the first half. And then I'm going to do some sketching and drawing and talk a little bit about Polynesian star families in the second part, then Blue Moon, and we'll give you a little update on what to look for in planets. Before all of that starts, I also wanted to introduce Kim Baptista. She is our webmaster. She's the one that puts the webinar together. Any communication that you've had so far and afterwards is going to be through Kim. And so it's with her hand that we sort of get these things organized and keep on time and keep on track. So thank you, Kim, for doing that. Before we start, I just have, we don't usually do this. We usually do polls and questions later in the program, but I have a little poll I'm going to launch for you. And I'm going to ask you, the audience, if you were able to attend our Earth and Space Exploration Day last Saturday. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But the other thing is, about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, when we were doing our program, we talked a lot about OSIRIS-REx, and it's a mission to grab some regolith, grab some sort of some dust and rocks off of the surface of an asteroid. And I asked you to go watch some NASA footage on that and sort of the NASA broadcast. That was a week ago Tuesday, and I hope you did. And it looks like several of you did. That's 110 of you actually did, 117, 118 of you watched the touch and go. Excellent. And 148 of you, I'm sorry, I'm exactly backwards. 49 of you watched it and 23 of you attended EC Day. Good, that's what we needed to know. I'm gonna go ahead and call it close to that poll, and I'm just gonna play for you, or Alicia is going to play for you, a really quick 1-minute video that's going to really inspire you. The touch and go with OSIRIS-REx was a success. Check this out, and I'll give you a little update right afterwards. Absolutely incredible. Anything I do for the rest of the night cannot follow that. Let me just bring everybody up to speed on the project. As you saw, it's a small spacecraft. It's a small asteroid. The idea was to go, we use that mechanical arm, grab some of that stuff off of the surface. They call that regolith. And then afterwards, they were examining that regolith just to make sure they had some. They had 3 opportunities to go get. So if this first touch was a failure, they could go back 2 more times. As they were examining the head and looking for stuff and sort of trying to assess how much stuff they got, they noticed that some of it was leaking away. So some of the stuff they captured is drifting off into space. And that was not intended, and that was not something they expected to see. So they changed the mission a little bit, and they decided they did have enough regolith, and they essentially went through a stow procedure where they took that little head, they stick it into a sealed container. That container is going to come back to Earth in about 3 years. But there was some drama earlier this week, just sort of like making sure that whatever they sort of had, they could keep and get it stowed and get it home. Much more to learn about that mission. And if that inspired you to go look, NASA has information on it, and the whole of the project is done by the University of Arizona. ASU has a camera on board. We've been involved in the project since the get-go, so it's really special to us in Arizona. Both universities are working on it. U of A runs it, so look into that and see what happens and see how it works. But that's pretty exciting in these times where there's some uncertainty and everybody's stressed and everybody's at each other's throats. To have a success like that and to have that kind of enthusiasm about the work that they're doing just makes me feel good, makes me feel wonderful all over. I am just going to very quickly now, I'm just going to launch another system on another computer. We're not satisfied just to do this with one computer, so we actually have 3 tonight to work with, and I'm sharing a screen here with you. And here's what we're looking at. We're going to examine 5 constellations tonight. We're just going to go kind of looking for them, and these are not your big, huge, bright constellations. This is not your Big Dippers, and this is not your Orions. This is not that stuff. But we're well positioned to see some stuff, and here's why. This particular panorama, this image, is simulating being on the top of my building. So I'm in the Marston Theater. You can see it in the background. This is a 7-story building. On the roof of the building, if you look towards the south, that's South Mountain, and you can see all those stars. So Saturn and Jupiter and Mars, and then the moon tonight, it moves quite a little bit, but it sort of frames our field of view. So you can go out tonight. This is your 8 o'clock thing. You will absolutely see these objects. Saturn and Jupiter are there, very, very bright. They're next to each other, and they look like they're at that orientation. The very, very big, bright orange Mars will be up tonight, and the moon will be nearby it. It's a waxing, it's a waxing gibbous moon, and it'll be a full moon, as you already know, on Halloween in just about 3 days. So that sort of is our frame, but there's a whole bunch of obscure constellations out there. Now, let me show you the bad news here. There's a lot of stars out there, and I have control over them. I can make them bright, I can make them dim, I can make them all this stuff. Let me make them realistic. And oh my gosh, that's kind of our view of the night sky. This is really what we get to see from the city. But I don't look at this as a bad thing. I look at this as a challenge. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through some constellations. I'm going to show you what they mean, talk a little bit, some stories about them. And I'm definitely going to give you some things to look for, some things that you can actually sort of, if you'll take this challenge, look in these areas, and I'll show you what to look for. Let me bring those stars up just a little bit more so we can see a little bit more about what they look like. The constellations are these. First of all, we're going to talk about Capricorn. And these are all going to be constellations that are in an area of the sky. All 5 of them have something to do with water. And it's a funny area of our celestial sky because it does all contain water. We're going to take a look at Aquarius, right? Sort of next one in line over there. And if you know your zodiac and you sort of like can sort of guess where I'm going next, right next to that is the constellation and the area of Pisces. And I'll have to shift the screen a little bit to see Pisces and another constellation. The other 2 is not in the zodiac, but there's one just below the system here. It's called Pisces Austrinus. Well, people don't even know there is a constellation called that. That actually means southern fish. Pisces means fishes, right? And Pisces Austrinus means a southern fish. And so we'll kind of look at that and the importance. Notice that there's a bright star in Pisces Austrinus right here, this one right here. I'm going to show you a little bit about that star. It's the only sciencey thing we're going to get into. Most of this is going to be cultural about the constellations, but that star is something really important in research and science right now. So we're going to do that. Lastly, a constellation that doesn't get a lot of airtime is called Cetus. Cetus is a whale. You probably know that a lot of the star systems, and especially star systems of old, the scientific natural name for things like cetaceans is whales. Cetus is actually a whale or a monster or a kraken. And so we're going to get cracking here. We're going to like do this. First, I'm going to just take, I'm going to take these three, the ones that are sort of centered on the screen, and I'm going to use those as a, sort of a way to get started here. Let me turn some things off now that I got a bunch of stuff on here. I'm just pushing buttons. That's all that we do here. So let me sort of put the stick figures up. This is Capricorn, and the thing to look for in Capricorn, and I'll sort of like go over this in a little bit of detail here. The alpha star of Capricorn is just right here up at the peak of this little sort of like stick figure right here. And Capricorn is a sea goat, or a part goat, part fish, and it's a constellation of the zodiac. The reason I like to point out this is I think in the sky, I have seen it recently within the last couple of weeks. I go out and I take my dog for a walk, and we go out and I kind of like just check the seeing, you know, what you can sort of observe, what you can't. A lot of these stars, I'm afraid, are just really obscure for our city lights, but this one you can see. And when you see it, what you're going to look for is two stars. Alpha Capricorn is actually a double star system, but there's two kinds of double systems. One is the kind where they actually orbit each other, and there are examples of those. This one is not. It's called an optical double. And one of the stars is really very, very close to us, relatively. It's in our neighborhood. The other one is way, way far away, thousands and thousands of light years away. And so you're seeing them as if they look right next to each other, but in reality, it sort of gives you a sort of like reference to the depth of space, one of the stars in that little sort of double system at the head of Capricorn. I'll give you some artwork here so you sort of like get a little bit sort of into that. Capricorn is sometimes known as just a goat. Most of the time in star charts, we see it as this fish-goat combination thing. One of the stories I like about it is, you remember Pan, right? The guy with the little horns on his head, and he had goat feet. And one day he was absolutely frightened by a monster called Typhoon, and he was running away and trying to get away from it. And his solution was to jump into the Nile River. And the act of doing that turned his bottom half, everything below the waist, into a fish, and the rest of it remained a goat. And that's where it sort of lives today. I like it because it's the perfect constellation to talk about this transition from sort of the landed world, right? The constellation before this is Sagittarius, and before that, the Scorpion. This one sort of makes that transition for us from land kind of things into sea kind of things. So the sea goat, and there it is, it's Capricorn. Let me get Aquarius up on the screen here. This is a very, very obscure constellation. Nothing in it is very bright, and I see it in artwork represented all kinds of different ways. And so I'm going to just show you a couple of things about this. Here's the sort of the sketch art from our particular system. You can see it intermingles with Capricorn there just a little bit, at least his figures do. Almost always, there's of course an urn or a jug or an oya or something that is dumping water, and the water is going straight down towards the south. One direction. This is water from the sky going to another place, and it doesn't go the other way. So this continual, perpetual flow is something that I think is actually kind of serious here, and something we should remember. The water dumps into that other constellation we were talking about. Remember Pisces Austrinus, right down here? This is the star we sort of like call Fomalhaut. This is the alpha star of Pisces Austrinus. Let me give you some artwork so you can kind of just get a little sense here. There's your little fishies, southern fishes. And I'm going to show you some antique sort of star charts. I love looking at old charts. I love looking at sort of the when people first started printing presses, started etching, and they started the artwork. It shows us a little bit about the night sky. Let me show you what this particular sky looks like to ancient people. So there's your Aquarius. There you can see he's got his bowl thing. And you look at that water. It just flows right out of the bowl, kind of bends around his knee, and just goes right directly into Pisces Austrinus. You'll see another one here in a minute where it just goes in his mouth, all of the water from the jug down below into the fish, and that's it. And so in a way, they are attached. One is a constellation of the zodiac. The other one is actually just another hanging out constellation in this watery part of our sky. But that's what it looks like. I have another image here, and I'm afraid it's not the best quality. I'll bring it up, and so you'll see a little bit more about. So there's another way to look at Pisces Astrinus. You can see there's the jug, there's the flow of water, and there's the fish down there. And look, he's swallowing everything, all of the water. You know, in the science of the day, they would understand where water comes from, right? Clouds and rain and streams and river. But I want to sort of like stress on this idea that water only goes one direction. They would not have had at the time the understanding of evaporation or water as vapor, or they wouldn't sort of like know that that's sort of how that happens. And so this sort of almost magical way to take water and bring it down, and just it is a continuous process with no real beginning, is actually sort of a part of the story here. Let me just show you another sort of depiction of just Pisces Astrinus itself. If I can just do this, let me see, I've just sort of lost track of where my buttons are. This one is sort of pretty typical about how that fish looks. He's often upside down. And you see that little sort of a hot air balloon thing next to it over there off to the side. There are a number of constellations that sort of sometimes appear in star charts and then disappear again. The star charts were made mostly, in this particular case, this is a little bit later one, at that time that technology was developing. So there was a wave of first constellations were from the Eastern Mediterranean cultures. That's where our zodiac comes from and all that stuff. Then there was an attempt to sort of like put constellations into places we hadn't been before. So the age of navigation added a bunch of things to our southern hemisphere in particular. And then was this sort of like wave of innovation and technology and all that stuff. So telescopes and microscopes and forges and all this kind of stuff. In this case, a hot air balloon. It was in sort of star charts for a little bit, and then it disappeared. Remember that star I was talking about? It's called Fomalhaut, and it's a bright star, and you can see it tonight. So this is one of your targets tonight. Now, sort of remind you about that a little bit. I want to show you what Fomalhaut looks like to the Hubble Space Telescope. And so it's only about 25 light years away. So Fomalhaut is in our sort of neighborhood, if you want. It is the brightest star in this part of the sky, to be sure. It's outshined by all the planets around it now, but that's just now, right? If you go out at this time of year, or at 8 o'clock in the evening, and look at the southern sky, the brightest star you're going to see is this one, this Fomalhaut. It's the eye, or actually it means the mouth of the fish, and it is the alpha star of Pisces Astrinus. What you're seeing here, though, is absolutely amazing. So this was taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, and so there's optically and mechanically, we sort of shade the star itself. So the brightness of the star is gone. What you see here is an early proto-solar system. This is a debris disk. And this is what scientists and researchers will tell you our solar system looked like billions of years ago. We think we're about 4.5 billion years old. As we formed, we were hot, we were dirty, everything was a mess, and everything was spinning into this disk before planets actually formed. But because the Hubble is so cool, and because they've been looking at this particular debris disk for many, many years, you see in the little inset, this little square right here holds the clues to sort of some movement in this particular system. So you see images that were taken in 2004, 2006, 2010, and 2012. And what they're seeing is the actual movement of this object right here, which is a hot Jupiter-sized body that is just in the stage of formation. This is like a planet being born. This shows us essentially how we were made. This is sort of like showing us what our theories tell us about the formation of the solar system and how planets come together. and how that works. So Fomalhaut is a really, really amazing star. When you look at it tonight, just kind of keep this in your back of your mind. There it is. It's a star you might not have ever heard of. It means fish's mouth. It's in Pisces Astrinus, but it is actually contemporarily a really important star right now for us to understand the formation of solar systems and how they work. So that's something we have to look at. Okay, I'm going to move forward a little bit and away from these particular stars. I wanted to show you one more thing. Let me just sort of get some artwork up on Pisces, the fishies here, just so you can see what they are. And then I'm going to shift the screen here because most of Pisces is sort of like off over more towards the west tonight. But before I go, I've been talking over the course of this program a lot about the line of the ecliptic. And so you see here, this is how that line traces through the sky. The line of the ecliptic is the path of the sun against the background stars and the constellations. So you would guess, before I even did this, that if you know your stuff, the ecliptic plane of the solar system and our relationship with the sun essentially moves the sun through these constellations. The 12 constellations of the zodiac are the path of the sun. The line I'm showing you is the ecliptic path, and the dates on the line I'm showing you is when the sun is in these particular areas. Some people think that this is why this part of the sky has become sort of known for its watery worlds and a celestial sort of a water area. And that's because when the sun is in Capricorn, it usually, or used to, trigger the first day of winter, right? That's the solstice, December 22nd, and it triggers the rainy season. So right at that time, we're sort of folding up our agricultural season. The crops are in, you know the story. We've sort of like put everything up. We've kind of prepared for the winter, and then comes the rains. And that's why this particular sort of constellation area comes up, and it's all sort of about water. I have another theory I'm going to get to in a little bit, but before then, let me show you these other two constellations. So before we go, and then I'm just going to go back to this image just for a second, because remember in this ancient star chart, you can see the line of the ecliptic, right? I sort of have it oriented the same way, cutting right across this picture. So this is something that has been understood for many, 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 many hundreds, if not thousands of years, that there is this specific pathway that the sun takes. And even these ancient charts kind of have that particular pathway associated with them. So here's the one through space, and here's the one through the chart. You can sort of see how that works. All right, now I'm going to move over. I'm just going to have to spin our dome just a little bit. I'm going to go 20 degrees over towards the western part of the sky, actually a little bit more maybe. Let's get over here. And so here's your fishies, Pisces. It's the last of the months of the zodiac calendar. Right after this, we would move into Aries, and that historically triggered the first day of spring. So these three constellations are your winter constellations and your rainy constellations at the same time. The Pisces are kind of like right next to and around Mars, so you probably will be able to sort of like use that as a marker right now. Mars is moving though, so it will work for you tonight. It won't work for you in future years because it won't be there. But use it sort of like to understand, sort of like move around to see this part of the sky. Pisces also, I have some artwork for that too, because I really like this one. So this just kind of gives you an example of an old chart and an older chart. So the fishies are sort of associated with, well, the story is that one time an egg dropped out of the sky into the ocean, and fishes shepherded that egg and sort of brought it over towards land. The egg hatched, and it hatched into Aphrodite. So you know Aphrodite and Venus are sort of the same character, right? Roman and Greek. And the story is that she was born out of the sea. The fishes apparently found their place in the sky in gratitude for basically saving and pushing the egg into the right place where she could be born. You see here in the old one, this is actually is a 10th century, the one on the right is a 10th century drawing on vellum. And I don't know if you can see this, but inside the fish's bodies, it sort of looks like scales, but that's writing. And that is essentially the story I just told you in the 10th century from documents that they found from the classic Greek times. So Hyginus actually is the one sort of like wrote up all these things, talked to everybody about zodiac and the constellations and how they are and all that kind of stuff. And so this sort of made it onto this particular page 800 or some years later. And look, there's absolutely no attempt to place these fishies necessarily in the sky where they are. In this particular case, you can see a little string of stars. It sort of shapes the top of the two fishes. It strings them together, but they're not oriented right. They're not essentially in a field of stars and all this stuff. And so this particular vellum, this particular page, all 12 of the zodiac signs are in here, but it wasn't necessarily a scientific look of the relationship of stars and how they were. It was actually sort of more just a representation of here's this thing and these are fish and here's the story. The other one on the left actually is more traditional, and you can see that there's fields of stars. These stars are remarkably accurate where they are. It shows the relationship of the fishes and all this stuff. Now let me show you one more thing. If you were with me 2 weeks ago, remember I sent you outside to find the Great Square. You had two things to look at. One was the teapot of Sagittarius. The other was the square. It actually appears right here. So this is Pegasus, and these four corner stars are the square of Pegasus. You looked at it from this orientation. So this is more diamond-like. This is the bottom star. And this one sort of starts the trail to go find Andromeda over this way. And this one and all this stuff. So here's how they're sort of nestled together. And here's how they relate to each other. Important to things. And I'm going to show you a little asterism up here. Let me, I can actually see it if I turn the picture off. Hang on 1 second. In this picture. Right up over here, is a little sort of circlet of stars. It's very dim. It's very, very difficult to see, but this is what we're going to kind of look for when we're sort of trying to understand one of the fishes of Pisces. It's actually 5 or 6 stars that make this little sort of like almost like a complete circle in the sky. And that's your target for here. For Aquarius, your target is these 4 stars right here. There's one, it looks like a little tripod. Here's a center, one off in this direction, one off in this direction, one off in this direction. So 4 stars kind of creating this little tiny triangle shape. And that actually always forms the sort of the mouth of the bowl or the Oya or whatever the water is coming out of. And then the rest of the bowl is kind of made out of stars up here. So in Capricorn, you're going to look for that alpha star, that double star system. And you know it's an optical double, not a real one. And in Aquarius, you're looking for this little sort of like little 4-star point that sort of marks the beginning of the bowl. And in Pisces, you're going to look for this little circlet right here, this little sort of circuit trail, and see if you can find that. We've got one more constellation to look at before we move on, and I'm going to just kind of introduce you to Cetus. Cetus is a whale or a sea monster. Cetus is going to play really, really strongly in our program on November the 18th. We're going to talk about a story that includes 6 constellations, including this one, and it's the kidnapping of Andromeda, Perseus, and the rescue. The sea monster plays as sort of like coming out of the sea to eat Andromeda, and this is the one. And we'll go into that in great detail in 3 weeks. You're going to sort of see that as part of our November show. Before we get there, though, I just sort of like wanted to use a little time to scare you to death. Yes, this little guy is in the night sky. Look how he's got almost like horse-like front legs and this big, huge sort of fishtail body, really, really sharp teeth and lots of appendages hanging up. You can almost see his bad breath in front of you right there. And so don't forget this face. We're going to talk more about Cetus, the sea monster, the whale, and where it is in this particular part of the sky. We're going to talk about it a lot more in 3 weeks as part of that other much, much bigger story. One more quick thing to show you on the screen here is sort of as we've done, oops, it didn't come up. Hang on 1 second. And sort of show you, here's sort of a depiction of a globe. When we first started making star charts, this is about 300 years old, they would do them sort of as a globe around the Earth. So you would have your Earth globe that had your land masses and all that stuff, and you would have your celestial globe. And you can see the constellations we've been talking about tonight. Here's that line of the ecliptic, right, kind of tracing up through the zodiac. We talked about the sea goat over here. We talked about Aquarius. In this case, Aquarius facing the other direction, but there there's the jug or the vessel. There is emptying water into Pisces Astrinus. Here is Pisces the fishes, and they're sort of surrounding the great square of Pegasus, which happens kind of up here. And here's that big, huge monster, sea monster guy that we were just talking about. This is the watery part of the world. Now, I'm just going to, just a moment, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to come back with a whole different way to look at the night sky from the perspective of navigation and seafaring people. But before we get there, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about this watery sky. I already alluded to the idea that people think that maybe these are all water constellations because of the trigger of the rainy season. I would suggest it's close to that, but I think it also has to do with sea activity. I've mentioned this before, but there was a poet named Hesiod. He was a contemporary of Homer. This is 400 years before classic Greek. People wrote epic poems. Hesiod wrote one, Theogony, which is about the history, the beginning of everything, the creation story. But the other one was called Works and Days. And I talked a lot about how he related stars in the sky, their movement, to labors on earth, and in particular agriculture. We talked a lot about this with Boötes, the herdsman, and Arcturus, and the stars, and sort of the plow and all of that kind of stuff. The other part of Works and Days, after that, he goes into the things that are labors, are occupations of man that have to do with the sea. Fishing and traveling and navigation and exploration and those kinds of things also sort of work their way in. So this, folks, is 600 or 700 BC. This is a long, long time ago. The other thing is that this part of the sky, when it's prominent, when you can see this, and when this is all happening, when we're transitioning out of agriculture, and when we're transitioning into this talk about water, this is in the south and southeast. Geographically, the people of the Eastern Mediterranean to the south and southeast would be the Indian Ocean. They wouldn't have had access or any experience with the Atlantic Ocean out the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, but just across the Arabian Peninsula, people were already at that time navigating across the ocean, going back and forth to Islamabad and points in what's now India and that kind of stuff. And that trade was happening, and that's a wintertime pursuit. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to suggest to you that the people sort of always related the sky to the land. We've always related the movement of stars and the cycles of stars to the occupations of man and what we do and how we organize our festivals and how we organize our stuff. And so I'm going to suggest to you that this part of the world, this part of the sky, is kind of sea related because it relates to that time of year, that sort of juxtaposition, the geography of the thing. And if you want to throw in the rainy season, I think we can do that too. All right, that's it. I'm going to take a break here. We've got a little poll coming up, some questions. I'm going to unshare my screen and turn the program over to my students so they can kind of walk you through some polls and some questions. Thank you, guys. I'll be back in just a minute.
Thank you, Rick. So we have a poll for you guys. Let me launch it real quick. So the first question is, which of these is not considered an aquatic constellation? And you have your options there. And then for the second question, which famous star is in the constellation Pisces Astrinus? And while you guys answer that poll questions, I'm going to pass it off to my coworker Spoo, and she's going to answer some of the questions we've been getting live. So Spoo.
This is too easy.
Right. Hello. So we have a live question, and someone has asked, who established these constellations? That's a good question. So most of the constellations, so there are 88 recognized constellations right now in the night sky, and most of them, more than half of them, are attributed to the Greeks, Babylonians, Egyptians. But there are multiple cultures which have different interpretations of constellations, which you actually will see further down the program. So right now, half of them are accepted from these three major cultures, but there are a lot of versions. And so it's not really who made up these constellations, it's just what you see in the night sky. So you can make your own too. And let's hand it back to Alex and end the polls.
Okay, thank you. So let me end these polls real quick and share the results. Okay, so 77% of you said Cygnus was not an aquatic constellation. That's correct. It is a goose. And although goose can sometimes be found in water, they're not considered one of the aquatic constellations that we talked about tonight. And then for the second question, which famous star is in the constellation Pisces Astrinus? Fomalhaut is correct. That's one of the main stars. Altair, Vega, and Polaris are all very prominent stars in our night sky, but they're not in that constellation. Okay, so now it's back to Rick to continue the presentation.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much. I'm gonna just switch to yet another computer. This time I'm using my oh, look at that. I'm in my own picture. I'm using my iPad, and see if you can kind of follow this magic. I'm gonna share a screen here, and this is always a little bit clumsy the way this works, but I'm using a program called Procreate. And it's going to kind of help us sort of find our way around the next part of the thing. Oops, I better turn that around so it sort of like shows up right side up. There you go. And I got to close something here because my screen is obscured by the poll questions. So, so in this particular case, I'm shifting gears quite a little bit. And one of the things that the night sky has brought to us over time is understanding cultures and the practical use that they use stars for. In this particular case, I just kind of ran across this. I was invited to, and I joined just a webinar. It's hosted by people that kind of are into the native cultures, not only in this case Polynesian, centered on Hawaii, but also native cultures here in the West and up in the Northeast. And there's a little seminar series going on. I'm going to include information about the series. I think it's just coming to a little closer, about to take a break, but I'll include it in the survey results if you're interested in this. This one I found fascinating. And what you're looking at here is information that is gathered and for educational purposes and distributed by the Emaloa Science Center in Hilo, Hawaii. So it's associated with the University of Hawaii. It's on the Big Island. The city is Hilo. The University of Hawaii is there, and this is a science center that is associated with that. Unfortunately, right now, they're closed. I did try to reach out to them to see if somebody from there could sort of explain what's going on, but I'll show you how this works. We have been using through the course of our particular program over this several months, the ability for me just to kind of like sketch on a little program here, or a sketch on a night sky. And let me just show you how this works. First of all, I'm going to have to, this is a little bit clumsy because you're going to see me kind of turn things on and off a little bit. Just to sort of like get the right information up here. And I wanted to just share with you these 4 star families, because a lot of the constellations that we're going to kind of tie together here are stuff we've already gone over in our program. Remember, we started this way back in May, in the first part of June, and we started it with an area that included the Big Dipper. And so I'm just going to kind of just, let me just write on the bottom here. So I'm going to say that I'm going to show you some May constellations. 3 months later, June, July, August, we're going to show you this, and you're going to see some of the things we looked at in August. And August, September, October, November. This is stuff in the sky right now. I'll sort of explain to you the way the Polynesians saw this and what we were looking at tonight. And then something we haven't gotten to yet, of course, in February, sort of rounding out our year, is another part of the sky. We will get there. We're going to take a break for Christmas, but then we'll come back and kind of do that. And so I'm just going to walk you through all of these. For the Polynesians, they had these star families, and they're organized to go north-south. So they kind of make a strip across the entire sky, northern horizon to southern horizon. And they have names. This one is actually called the backbone. And I'll sort of just write it there so we sort of remember. You can see that. This is the fishhook of Maui. This is called the kite of, I'm sort of having trouble with it, Kilauea. Oops, Kilauea. And this one is actually the scoop or the gourd or the bale. So they're going to call it a baler. And it was very, very important to transportation to have some way sort of like to get the water out of your boat and all this stuff. And all of these things became symbolic of finding a way across the night sky, because they've kind of attached these star families together. And I'll show you sort of how that works in the night sky, and then use them as their navigation principles. Okay, I am going to turn these off for a moment. We're going to look at the first image here. Is this particular one here. Oops, I got the wrong one. Hang on a second. That's why. That's why we rehearse. Hang on one quick second here. I've just got boom, 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 boom. I had this all sorted out before the program tonight. And now they're moving around only just a little bit. Hold for one quick moment here. Let me give you an example of sort of how this works. So this is what we call the Baylor, and you can see this is a part of the sky we haven't talked about yet, but I'm just going to kind of connect. These two stars are associated with Gemini, and I can kind of trace this over towards Orija, and then sort of follow this particular sort of orientation here. This is the constellation Orija. And then we can kind of drop straight down to this particular star right here, over to Sirius, and then down to Canopus. And this is a February part of the sky. We're going to get to this, and right after Christmas, we'll be able to kind of talk about a lot of these particular constellations and what they do and how they mean. Notice that in their particular system, they did not use Orion, so which is right here. It was available, but it doesn't sort of like fall into this particular story. Taurus, the Bull, is also here, and some other very, very bright constellations that we are going to talk about and sort of use as part of our nighttime sky, but they didn't do it. Also notice that all of these constellations and how they attach to each other are sort of favoring the southern part of our sky. Polynesians would have actually had access to the night sky that would look like this. It would have been equatorial. So their dome of the sky, looking up from the equator where they're sailing back and forth between the islands and all that stuff, would be a little bit lower in the sky. And that's where they would do that. Let me see if I can get another one up here. Sorry about the sort of like trouble with some of these particular images. We already did that one. Yeah, all of my layers seem to be messed up here just a little bit. So I'll try to just see if I can get to another part of the sky up, and then I'll move on so we don't have to do too much of this. This particular part of the sky is where we are tonight. So remember we were talking about the Great Square, and that happens to be right here. And then in their culture, if you draw a line up towards one of the stars in Cassiopeia, draw this one up to the brightest star in Cephus. We come down this particular direction and sort of find our way down here, down here, down here, and down here. We sort of like create that. This was the group that we had that was associated with the kite. This particular area over here, you can sort of just barely make it out. Remember, I was telling you where to look in Aquarius for that little tripod thing. I was telling you sort of how to find the little double star system in Capricorn, which is over here. This is the Oya that sort of like drums the water down. This particular star right here is Fomalhaut, the one that we kind of like talked about as one of the stars in the star systems that are under research right now. That great whale in the sea is kind of up over in this particular direction. So you can start to see how the stars that we look at in our Western culture and our Eastern Mediterranean cultures sort of are interacting with our night sky, and we're coming up with our stories about them. They're also using those stories to sort of drive home this idea about navigation. Let me show you that very, very quickly here. Here's another way to look at this. I'm just going to kind of sketch out for you that navigation star system that I was just talking about. And oops, cancel that. Go here, go here. I should be able to. Oh, there it is. I'm going to kind of, here's that great square again. A star here in Cassiopeia, a star here in Cephas, a star down here was Fomalhaut. In their particular system of understanding the sky, they would use 4 horizons: a northeast, a southeast, a southwest, and a northwest. And in between each of the cardinal directions, east, west, north, and south, are 7 houses. And what would happen is they would understand through experience and understanding that a star like this one in Cassiopeia would rise in the house of Nolo, and it would travel almost straight across the sky, unlike here where they arc across the sky at the equator, and it would set in an opposite horizon, and it would set in the same house. See how these are labeled the same, going up from west to north? Up, east to north, up from west to north, and down. So each star in their particular system and how they kept track of them by virtue of these things would have a rising point, a travel direction, and a setting point. And that would be how they would understand to navigate. So if they had a destination through experience, through memory, through understanding, and through sort of using this particular system, they would know how to navigate across vast distances of the ocean to find stars in the other parts of the sky. And so that's a really amazing kind of use of the stars to do this. There are people that do this right now. There is a system of bringing in and training new navigators into this age-old process. They are admitted after much training and much practice into this order of navigators. And the session that I was talking about included one of these navigators and how they find their way across the sky. So even now, they use this technology and this knowledge that has been passed on for years to create 2-hold canoes. And then without any technology at all, without GPSs and compasses and radios and any of that kind of stuff, they use this old system for looking at the night sky and seeing the stars and moving across and using that to navigate. So it's absolutely fascinating. I'm going to sort of bring up that credit again, just so you can sort of see. So I can show you that who's in charge of this particular thing. This is the Imaloa Science Center in Hilo, Hawaii. You can go there. Their website is great. Their facilities are closed, and so I've been having a hard time reaching them directly, but their facilities are closed, but they have after school program ideas, and they have other things that they can distribute to you, and you can find it. You can read about this. There's actually even a documentary about this system of travel and how they sort of do this navigation thing across the oceans, and it's absolutely fascinating to me. I like the way that it relates to the way we've approached the night sky in our virtual night sky program, talking about the stars that are associated with the times of year, talking about the things that you can go out after the program and look for in your night sky seasonally. This is the season to talk about water, and that's really where I'm going to kind of leave this. We're going to take another quick break here, got another question break and a poll break, and then I'm going to come back and introduce one of my students, Alicia, who's going to talk a little bit about the blue moon. And then I'll give you a little planet update of kind of what to watch for over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll sort of like call it a night. So hang on for those things. Poll break next. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. We're going to go ahead and launch the poll.
We'll figure out how to unshare here.
Okay, there we go. So what is the phase of the moon tonight, and what is a blue moon? So go ahead and vote for your suitable option. And we're going to go to Alex, and he'll take a few questions online.
Smriti, I don't see the poll up. Is that just me, or is that?
There we go.
I went ahead and launched it.
I got. Thanks.
Okay, so now you guys should have the option to answer the poll.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, so we have a question from Patty who says, once we are no longer able to see Jupiter and Saturn come December, so right now Jupiter and Saturn are setting in the night sky, they're coming closer and closer to the western horizon. When is the next time we'll be able to see them clearly? So usually Saturn and Jupiter, since they're so close together in the night sky, usually they kind of both show up around early spring, sometime close to March, and they usually reach their peak around July or June. It varies year to year since they're obviously moving in their own orbits, but right now they're fairly close and their orbits are slower than ours. But once it comes late, kind of early spring, and then they reach kind of their peak in late summer. And then let me see if we have any other questions. So that's the question we had. So, Spoo, do you want to end the polls?
Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna share the results. Waxing gibbous and second full moon in a month. So most of you got that right. And I think I'm gonna hand it back to Rick and we can continue with the program.
Thank you. There is some controversy about everything, and so yes, absolutely, that's absolutely correct. The way we sort of treat the blue moon right now, the lunar cycle is, well, Alicia will explain all that, but there is another sort of way to think about that, is that there are normally 12 lunations in a year. But that isn't a full year. So every once in a while, we've talked about that in this program, about every third year, you have to add another full moon in order to sort of like make up for the difference. And they do that in the Chinese culture, especially they also do it in the Jewish calendar. You sort of know they have to add a month to sort of like keep their ceremonies on track. And so there is a period where you actually have 13 full moons instead of 12. And some people accept that as the blue moon. I'll turn it over to Alicia, though, let her explain what we think.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And to help me talk about the blue moon is Luna, Rick's dog here. And you can see she's looking at just your typical full moon that we see. But we have something special happening in the month of October. We have a blue moon. And so some people may not know exactly what a blue moon is, and they may think that it may be a shift in the light in the atmosphere and that the moon may look blue. We know that that's not actually the case, and we're going to talk about what a blue moon is right now. So a blue moon is just when there are two full moons in a single lunar month, right? So two full moons, and this is pretty neat to think about, that we get to witness this in one lunar cycle. We're lucky enough to have two moons. And so what's super exciting about October, or I'm sorry, I jumped ahead just a little bit. Let me back up here. So this month, October 1st, we had our first full moon, and that was known as the harvest moon. And so this is the closest full moon to the first day of autumn. And so this, like I said, is the harvest moon, and that happened just a few weeks ago on October 1st. And then we'll have our second full moon happening on October 31st, and that's going to be the hunter's moon. And so hunter's moon is named that because hunters were able to go out and do their jobs because the moon provided enough light for them to do their jobs at night. So that's where it gets its name from. So the moon is not actually going to be turning blue for us. There have been reports of people seeing blue moons in the 1800s, but that was because of a giant volcanic eruption that happened and changed the color the light particles that we see. So it will not actually be moon, but be blue. But what's really exciting is that we are here in 2020, and this is the first time we will have a blue moon on Halloween since 1944. So it's been quite a few years, 76 years, and we're really excited to be able to see it this month. And if you're wondering when the next time we'll see a blue moon is, it's 19 years from now. So not as far as 76 years, but still pretty far. So Luna and I and the rest of the Marston team would like to remind you to go outside and look at the full moon or the blue moon happening on October 31st. So thank you so much, Rick.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just getting another quick thing, little setup over here. The last thing we want to talk about tonight, we've been doing this thing called Planet Watch. And I'm going to just share my screen again. This time, I'm just going to show you just a quick little movie. It's only seconds long, but this should look familiar. You saw where the, oops, I started at the end. This is sort of where you will see and how you will see Saturn and Jupiter tonight. The next time we get together is going to be on November the 18th. And you might notice that's not 2 weeks away, but that is actually 3 weeks away. And so we're basically skipping the week that includes the Veterans Day holiday. And then the next 2 weeks would put us in Thanksgiving. So we're basically kind of putting one in the middle. And so that's going to kind of loosen things up a little bit. So not 2 weeks from now, but 3 weeks from now, come visit us again. And what I wanted to show you here, just watch this. I'm just going to kind of show you what Saturn and Jupiter are going to do over the next 3 weeks and where they will be when we meet again in the middle of November. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. Notice that they're kind of just continuing to move over towards the west. Saturn is getting a little higher and Jupiter a little lower. And so they're orienting sort of like towards they're going to start heading down into the western horizon. And then 3 weeks from now, that moon will have passed through its full phase, the full moon, and gone all the way around and become a new moon. And it'll be about 3 days old by the time we get to this particular scene in the night sky in 3 weeks. And so we'll talk a lot more about them then. The really exciting part of this, I'm not going to show you, we're going to keep it a secret, but then in December, Saturn and Jupiter are actually going to get closer and closer and closer and closer together. And so this is going to be an adventure that we can keep looking at and keep sort of like seeing, and it's going to take us right up until Christmas. So come back and visit us in 3 weeks so we can do that. Just very, very quickly, I'm going to stop share this one. And I'm going to start share the other one. And I just always like to do this because we can show you what's happening in space that allows this us to see these particular objects like they are. So here is, these planets are blown up really big, so you're not going to see them this big actually. I can just do this in my particular system. But this is the relationship of, this is where the Earth is. And there you see Jupiter and Saturn kind of right next to each other in the distance over there. Earth is moving faster than Jupiter and Saturn in its orbit. So it's kind of moving around in such a way that it will be in front of the sun. I'm just going to double check my timing here. Yep, that's exactly right. So this is the relationship with all these things tonight. Notice that Mars is up over here. So if we look out in one direction, we see Mars. If we look out in the other direction from Earth, we see Saturn and Jupiter, and they look almost right next to each other. And you can use these lines in this particular orbit. You can see that what the Earth is going to do is continue to move around its orbit, and eventually the Earth will get behind the sun, or the sun will get in between us and those particular planets. They're moving much slower than we are. So that's what we can expect to happen. What you get to see here on the ground over the next couple of months is those two objects just getting closer and closer to each other. And then as we move around in our orbit, the sun will be between us and those objects. And so they will get lost in the sunset, and we will sort of lose them. And Alex was correct. Jupiter actually reappears for us in the same conditions about every 13 months, actually. Saturn about every 12 months. And so so next year, when they kind of come back again to our evening sky, you'll see the orientations have changed a little bit, one moving faster than the other, and that's how that works. Okay, I'm calling this to a close. We've got just 1 minute left for me to announce two more programs. One is on November the 12th. We call that the New Discoveries Lecture Series. If we were operating in that theater you see behind me, would be a lecture, and the guest this week, or on the 12th, is Elizabeth Trimbeth Reichert. She does all of her research in, she's a biologist and a geologist. She's and a chemist. She does a lot of her research at the bottom of the ocean. But she's going to talk to us about what they find, how they find life actually in rocks and what that tells them. And so a science lecture, everybody's invited, and find your way to get to that. The slide at the end of this program will show you how to connect to us. That's on Thursday, the 12th. And then we will be back with you on November the 18th. That's a Wednesday night. And that is the special night that we're going to take on the entire story of the rescue of Andromeda, and all of that entails 6 more constellations, big stories, some science behind them, lots of history, and some of those kinds of things is what we're going to tackle in 3 weeks. So please come back and join us. You will have a survey arrive in your email in the next couple of days. Please feel free to make any comments, send anything back. If there's something you want to see, if there's something we could kind of add to our program that would make it better for you, please let us know and we will do that. So thanks for coming. Thanks for attending. And I really appreciate the loyalty we have now of a growing audience of people that just want to do this with us on our Wednesday evenings and explore the night sky. Go out and look at these things tonight. See you later, guys.